Welcome to A Culture of Curiosity, a podcast delving into the school experiences of millions of children around the world. This is a curious podcast for educators by educators. And I'm Jack, a belonging and inclusion specialist.
And I'm Maureen, a former head teacher and now leadership coach and SEN specialist. We're talking all things inclusive education, creating a culture of curiosity around situations and dynamics that exist in every school, every day.
So whether you're a teacher, leader, or just passionate about creating schools where every child gets to belong, you've ended up in the right place.
What is it that gives the child the signal that you are somebody they can initiate that connection with? Because they don't go and do it with everybody. Some people, you don't even bother trying to. People get really hung up on racism in terms of words and language, and racist language and stuff like that. And I used to say to people, listen, racism has nothing to do with words that you use. Racism doesn't come out of your mouth, it comes out of your eyes. I can clock you as a bigot in any way the second I am in your presence. I don't even have to be face to face with you. And I suspect, because we shop in the same shoe shop, that's something that that resonates with you. So it's really interesting is that it's similarly, there are some people you just know you are safe with.
Yeah, and you're right, isn't it? Because I think part of the influence there is there's that variability around the experiences you've had and the kind of evidence that you've collected over the years as to what it is that you look for as I think a lot about polyvagal theory and signs of safety, the kind of cues of safety that we offer, and possibly the reverse of that, of what aren't those signs of safety. Now, here's a bit of an abstract reference for you, but one I think of a lot. There is a drag queen in Ireland called Pansy Bliss. We might have to censor that. And as a drag performer, they were kind of the spearhead of the kind of face of the campaign in Ireland around the same-sex marriage referendum.
Yes.
And they delivered this really interesting speech. It was called Panty's Noble Call to Arms, and it's on YouTube. Anybody should go and have a watch of it. And they talk a lot about the experience that they have navigating the world, and a world, like we've talked about, as not being one that was designed for them to fit and belong into. And as a gay person, as well as a drag performer, they talk a lot about what is it that gave them away? What is it about them that gave them away, or was the acknowledgement to an onlooker that connection would be different, or that it wasn't accessible, or that actually it wasn't about a positive kind of connection. It was about an acknowledgement of difference and hatred and all those kinds of feelings. And we look for those moments. I think a lot about when I first moved to university. I grew up on the Isle of Wight for a little while, then I moved to the Lake District, all kind of quiet, leafy places to grow up in. And then I moved to London to go to university. I was desperate for sort of, big city lights and excitement. And actually what it turned out to be was hangovers and old pizza boxes in your sort of uni dorms. And I remember the kind of excitement of going out, meeting new people, this kind of really exciting nightlife that was London, and thinking a lot about what were my cues of safety and who was it that I felt was accessible in being able to say hello to, to kind of smile at on the underground. And who was it that I would maybe consider moving away from? Somebody that I thought, actually, I worry about my safety in this context. And we become so hyper-vigilant that we're assessing connection and relationships every second of every day. It's
Absolutely.
A bit like that statistic. Is it that when you drive a car, you make, however many thousand decisions every minute or so to consider that safety? I think in the example of our classrooms, our kids are doing that. I'm a firm believer that if we think about behaviour and that children and young people are analysing our behaviour far before we've considered analysing and clocking theirs.
Absolutely. They have got your name and number the second they're in your presence, and to the minute level of detail. Really quickly, I was interviewing for a head of centre 2017 or something like that. And there was a candidate, and it was a 2-day interview, and it was the bit where they taught a lesson, and then the kids had to give a response. And there was just this one girl who said she was all right, of this candidate. She was all right, but I didn't like her shoes. And I didn't like her shoes because they were scuffed down. And she gave this minute detail about this woman's shoes. And it was just the tiniest of marks on her shoes, but and she said, and her shoes looked dusty, and if her shoes and she'd gone into such detail about this poor woman's shoes. And I said, well, what was she like as a teacher? She said, oh, she was all right. She hadn't actually done anything wrong, but these shoes had come to obviously represent everything that she felt it was a red flag to this girl. Later on turned out to be a number of things that were also red flags to me, but the shoes were this symbol for.
Yeah, and you're right. There are signs of safety and signs of the reverse, I guess. That I think a lot about how do we then offer connection? How do we cultivate and nurture connection? And often I think about the age-old kind of get to know you work that we do at the start, often of the sort of September term every academic year. And then I think a lot about, well, how often do we revisit that? I mean, I love pupil passports, those kind of one-page sheets that give us useful information about some of the young people that we support or spend a bit more time with than others for lots of reasons. But then how often do we revisit that? I mean, for some of our kids, their interests, for lots of reasons, not all good ones, they'll change overnight.
Absolutely.
So, that kind of opportunity to nurture connection, we consider, body language, tone, and how we position ourselves, all those kinds of things. But I think what we have got to consider is where do we make time for connection, and how do we seek it out to allow it to happen? That flexibility within a rigid system almost, of knowing that actually this might be a moment worth allowing to continue because of the connection that it offers, not just between a young person and a member of staff, but for a lot of occasions between other young people, that community feeling that we see.
Absolutely. And the pressure to do otherwise, and sometimes the reason why that it gets forgotten or is there is still, unfortunately, a 2-tiered system that takes place in particularly in mainstream schools, where there's that trade-off between academic and pastoral or life skills or whole child's well-being sort of thing. And it's that I can see how for teachers who are under pressure to produce results in an academic sense, where it becomes very, very tempting for the things that you have noticed about a child or the things that you pick up on what they say, for them to actually go in and then come out again the other side without registering. Actually, that's a really important or significant signal for me. And if I take the relatively small amount of time to unpick that and to think about it, I'm actually placing myself and the child in a better position to be able to get the best out of them academically.
Yeah, you're right. I always think of it a bit like professional plate spinning, and that every now and again we get a new piece of statutory guidance, and what that statutory guidance reflects is another plate that we're desperately doing this for, trying to keep them up in the air and turning. But you're right. I went to a talk at the Festival of Education about a year ago, and one of the sessions that was being delivered by a really lovely lady called Jerry, who I think she leads the Haringey Learning Partnership. And the quote that she offered was from a piece of research out of the University of Cambridge about this assumption that there is a kind of forever trade-off between well-being and academic achievement, that, realistically, there's an expectation that we've got to choose between one or the other, that we can't have both. We can't have academically successful young people and young people who are safe in a relational approach, who are nurtured, who are able to navigate the complexities of life around their well-being and their mental health. And that's frustrating because we know, because we're doing it, because there are lots of schools and education provisions around the world who are finding that balance, who are offering connection as the absolute bedrock to an education experience.
Absolutely. Many moons ago, long before you left school, actually, Jack. But
There it is. I knew it was coming.
I think it might have actually been long before you even started school. I was a sort of careers and work-related learning coordinator in mainstream school, and very definitely in terms of the hierarchy that existed, my work, which was vocational learning and then careers education, was very much, I knew it was very clear that if I wasn't at the bottom of the pile, I was certainly somewhere on the way down there. And I used to make myself even more unpopular. And I think I was probably a bit of an angry young woman then as well, sort of actively rail. And to be fair, I was probably playing into that either or scenario a little bit, where I would sort of challenge young people who perhaps dismissed the careers stuff and the interview skills or the sort of communication skills and all the things that I was trying to teach. It would be somewhat dismissed by the very academic children. Why do I need to learn this? I'm clever. Why do I need to learn this? And I would just pull them up by saying, all the qualifications in the world are only ever going to get you an interview. They're never going to get you the job. And they, what? I said, what? Because the only thing is, when someone's applying for a job, when you're looking at a job application, you look at whether or not they pass the minimum standards in terms of academic. And then once they've done that, that's it. That doesn't come back in unless you are so neck and neck with one person. They have to find some arbitrary way to choose between you. And one of you got what was then an A star and the other one got an A. That's the only time it's going to come up. And that is so rare, the chances of that happening. For the amount of energy you're putting into it, it's not going to be the be-all and end-all. What will get you a job and what will get you a promotion once you've got that job are the skills of, can you solve problems? Can you make decisions? Can you be flexible? Can you use your own initiative? Can people stand to be around you for very long, or are you really boring to talk to? Or, do you have interests? Do you have things that make you interesting? Do you understand the basics of personal hygiene? I'm going a bit off piece there, but I used to sort of, and these kids would look at me and it'd be like, yes, but no, I'm an A-star student, so therefore I'm already the complete package. And I think that most people, if you asked them now as adults whether or not the focus or the balance was right in their school days between academic and whole person development, they'd have to say no.
And I think it's interesting because I remember young people in my class that held that very same kind of assumption that I'm kind of I'm ready for the world because I'm performing well academically. And well done to them. That certainly wasn't how my brain kind of operated in the world. But when we think about, we come back to sort of teaching, often for those that don't work in education, if you ask them what it is that a school does, they would say, well, they teach children. We educate children. And while we educate in a whole manner of kind of contexts and subjects, what isn't on our curriculum maps, or not specifically, is that consideration around connection and relationships. While we look at supporting the sort of social and emotional development for our young people, we know that that's so vital for how it is that we prepare them for what's next. When we think of that transition of year 6 to 7, we know it's wild. It's such a massive jump that often I find that the the young people who are perhaps a bit more successful in that transition are the kids that are able to nurture new relationships. They are the kids that are able to find new peers, new groups, bring their existing peers with them to navigate the social environment that school represents. So if we don't teach it, if we don't allow for it, it represents such a bigger concern. And I think if we, bear with me, but if we strip away all of our phenomenal accomplishments, achievements, degrees, all those things, what it is that we do in school is prepare children for what's next.
Absolutely.
And that's a wide picture, you know. And we've got to connect with them.
My late father said to me when I was expecting my daughter, and this was a man who was very good at having children. He had a lot of them. And he said to me, well, the thing is that people get wrong is that they think that their job as parents is to raise children. And I'm saying parents, but it applies to teachers. They think that their job is to raise a child, but it's not. Your job is to create an adult. And it's a job that takes 18, 21, 25 years. And, you know, people think that it's something that they have to do. If you're raising a child, it's in the moment. If you're creating an adult, and that's your start point, you're planting seeds now, knowing that this child isn't actually going to need them until they're 12, 13, 14, 15. You'll be planting seeds in the 2-year-old that they're going to need when they're in their teens. You're planting seeds in the primary age child that you know they're going to need when they are parents themselves. Do you know what I mean? And such a profound thought. And it's not one that you hear in schools, is it? You don't hear the preparation for the next step actually including anything that even comes remotely to that perspective.
And I think that must be quite hard as well, though, because we know, and again, we'll save the kind of dissection of the current education industry for perhaps another episode. That'll be a long one. But we know that there is a huge responsibility around sort of output, outcomes and results. And I think it's hard to invest time and effort and your kind of battery almost in something that you kind of got to rationalize as something that, you know, they're seeds that I might plant, but I might never see those flowers grow.
Absolutely.
I might be planting them for you when they get to you in secondary. But that unified approach, you know, isn't just about us. It's not just about how we get kids through a system. It's not just about how we get them to do what we need them to do. It's that big, broad picture of what's next.
Absolutely.
Because connection happens in so many ways. I had a bit of a disagreement / argument / discussion around the word love. Should we be using the word love in education? And I said, absolutely yes.
You absolutely should be.
And the question is always the same, you know, but is it inappropriate? And, you know, none of us are suggesting the use of it in any kind of untoward fashion. But love and connection and relationships exist in so many different ways. I meet so many people, often taxi drivers, taking me from one place to another, who feel the need to tell me about their love for a football team, or their love for their car or their golf clubs. So if we're comfy with love existing in that capacity, why can't we be comfy with the way that love and connection has to work in our classrooms? Because I think we could all think of children and young people that we've worked with over the years where, thank goodness, we've had a degree of love, relationship and connection with them. Because if we'd have not, we'd have lost the plot. That's it.
Yes, absolutely. I remember saying this to it was a deputy director of education one time, where there was this child who'd assaulted a deputy head in a school, and so they'd come to me because they were permanently excluded. And it was about 6 months later, I was talking to the deputy director of education about the young people and stuff, and I mentioned this child, and their lip killed, and there's such horrible look of disgust. Oh, and he made some throwaway comment about, well, at least he stopped hitting people. I was talking about something he'd achieved, something he'd done really, really well. And he said, oh, he stopped hitting people then. And I just looked at him. I said, see, the thing is, I must use his name then. The thing is, you have connected with what this child did. I connected with who they are. And that's the difference. So yes, this child may well have done this terrible thing. And actually, it was through connecting with who they are that we got to the point where the child could honestly reflect on what they'd done. You can't actually improve behaviour. You can't improve behaviour without connection. You can't positively influence if you haven't got that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the thing that we've got to, I'm going to use the word aggressively, return to again and again, because especially when connection is kind of interrupted, when we have, tricky, complex, wobbly moments, it's then a consideration of how do we go back and nurture that connection?
Yeah.
I mean, that one member of staff I referred to at school, I mean, I was a young person who then started to find life was a lot easier when I was just what the label described. I just allowed staff to find me in the way that they thought that they would. Yes. That seemed to cause me less grief.
Yes.
But that one member of staff...
You want to have the stereotype, I'll be your stereotype.
Yeah, I got to a point where there was such a lack of connection for me at school that it just allowed me to have an easier life. It just allowed me to kind of float under the radar a bit more. But there was one member of staff, and I won't name her because she'd be terribly embarrassed, but I'm still really close to. She absolutely changed and shaped that part of my life, and I'm forever grateful. But there were moments when she'd shout and bark at me, and you will know, as somebody who knows and is connected to me, that I don't appreciate being shouted at and barked at. It's not the way to get results out of Jack. But what I had to depend on was that while I might not have enjoyed the experience, and maybe there's a discussion as to was it the right thing, all those things. It was the relationship that had offered me an experience that meant I maybe didn't like the shouting, didn't like the barking, but within that connection, I could trust that I believed that she was looking after me. That there was a safe way forward. Because
the connection enabled you to see where that shouting and barking was coming from, and it was coming from a place of care.
Absolutely. It all came to a head one day. There was a Barney in the back of a classroom that I was involved in, and she was asking me to leave the space and come with her. And I always talk about the fact that my feet were happier to move before I was. And that it was that connection, it was that relationship that meant I could depend on what was coming next.
Yes.
And while often, this idea of connection and nurture and relationships is talked about as this kind of soft, mushy approach, that actually it might be built in softer, lighter, more moments, but it's often what helps us navigate the real complexities of the human experience.
Absolutely.
Because it kind of offers this kind of safety tether. There were moments for me as a kid where I felt so out of control, it felt like I had no way back. That it was a done deed now. I couldn't undo what I'd done. But the thing that offered me that kind of tether was that one singular relationship.
Yeah.
That as long as I didn't mess that up, that as long as I could figure out a way to look after that when I was ready, that was something to hold on to.
And do you think from the and you may actually be able to ask them if it's someone you're still in contact with, but I'm wondering, from the point of view of that adult who's on the other end of that string, do you think it's something that they valued and respected and saw as important? Did you think that they knew at the time or got anything out of it themselves at the time?
That's a really interesting question. Immediately, my brain has said, "Oh, let's invite her on the podcast." I honestly think she knew exactly what she was doing. And maybe not in the context of we all find ourselves in situations where we've got no idea what we're doing, but we're trying to do something. That there was something that really special about that member of staff. She was light. I think one of the things that I find myself talking about and offering support in now is this idea in education of us and them.
Yeah.
This kind of separation that I'm the adult, you're the child, you do as I say because I say so. That
I'm never
big,
going to
you're
apologise.
small.
Even if I get it wrong, I'm never going to apologise because I'm an adult.
Yeah, and we know it's happening. I mean, I met an ECT last week who confirmed to me that she was taught in her ECT program, during her degree, the same message that we've heard for donkey's years of don't smile until Christmas.
Oh.
So we know it's happening.
Still there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was 18 months ago. She completed a degree.
That's shocking.
So we do know it's happening. But it was that for her, it was less about who she was as a member of staff, as a teacher, as a professional. It was that she is what I refer to as a real life human being. That connection to her felt a lot more accessible because she wasn't presented in a way that had to be kept at arm's length. She was a person trying to figure out school just in the same way that we were. And I think that reduction of barrier was really important for me because she felt like I would refer to as a bit more of a normal person. Yes. She's absolutely a member of staff that would have said, I've completely got that wrong. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
Yes.
So that felt accessible to me. It felt like I could be myself because she was being herself. And that's important.
It is. I was very aware when I was a class-based teacher, and since as well, obviously, right all the way through my career, but I was very aware that whenever I'm interacting with a young person, they needed to see me as a human being if I wanted them to see me as somebody that they could learn from. And it wasn't about me. I was a geography teacher, and it wasn't about whether or not how good I was at teaching the water cycle. It was actually, is this somebody who is comfortable with learning themselves? And I think that's it. If I think about it, and I'm sort of forming my thoughts as I talk, not at all unusual, but I'm forming my thoughts as I talk, is actually, I have always been a learner before I was anything else. And that's a whole part of who I am. And so that it means I set out to learn how I can best help you with this child to be successful. And I learn how I best help that child to be successful. It isn't a one-size thing. There are some things that are common and go right across, but every single individual human means it's a unique connection. And it doesn't matter whether there are 10, 20, 30 in the class. And I know that people might say that's the a big difference. It really isn't, because actually in a classroom, the number of children who stand out as needing you to teach them connection is only still small. And it isn't that the rest of the kids don't matter. It's actually the rest of the kids, a universal offer does the job, because they have other factors in their lives that make up that whole. Or they've already got an age-appropriate point of development, which means that your universal as a professional, as a teacher, as a human being, is satisfying them.
Yeah.
And there are only a few children that you actually have to really do that laser precision focus on and work out, where are they? They are not where everybody else is in terms of their whole self. Where are they? You might have to think, what is it that's caused them to not be there? And then you work with that from that point. So what do I need to do that is effective from my point of view as the educator. That's me being trauma informed. I'm informing myself about the nature of your trauma so that I can work out what bits I need to add in and focus on.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a really big thing. And you know, it's a big as in it's important, but it doesn't have to be big as in difficult. It can be being prepared to sit there and play Uno with a kid every dinner time. It can be as little as learning about Minecraft and listening to it. It can be as little as making a comment on Monday. Oh, you know, United did rubbish, didn't they, at the weekend? Or the Uniteds and football teams are available. But just in terms of practicalities, people think because it's an important thing to do, that it's difficult. And it isn't. It's that little everyday noticing, that little everyday practical thing. You know, Rita Pearson talks about it in having the crackers in the desk and that sort of thing. I did it just this week. I was delivering that a training, a 2-day training, Tuesday and Wednesday, and we were using a public venue. It wasn't it was actually a care setting I was delivering to, but it wasn't in their setting, and they didn't own the building. And on the Tuesday in the afternoon, this sounds really weird, but the nearest loos had run out of toilet paper. Or they were running very low. And as the day went on, I could hear people muttering about it and wondering about it. And I could see that anxiety, you know, and it was becoming a topic of conversation as we got towards the end of day one. And it was like, well, we've told them that we've run out, but they haven't replaced and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so on day 2, before I left the house, I picked up a roll of loo paper. And I brought it in and I put it on the table and I said, look, there. So even if they haven't done it, I've just removed that barrier. I removed that anxiety. And it was a connecting, bonding thing because we all laughed and we all this. They had replaced it. And at the end of the day, at the end of the 2 days, the manager of the care setting said, can I keep this? I said, why? I said, because I'm going to put it up in the home as a real symbol of how little it actually takes to make a big difference.
Yeah. I love that. I really, really love that because you're right. I think we do sometimes look for these kind of great big solutions, interventions and strategies because we know of the importance that they might carry. But actually our ability to look for those kind of small kind of things, the bits that we can have some autonomy over, it's really interesting because I wanted to think about, you know, how do we kind of bring what we've talked about together and think about what this might actually look like? But I think there we are, you know, those small, teeny tiny moments sometimes that if we offered a couple of extra seconds to look at what they could mean or what they could represent, actually a lot of the time these things are happening, you know, and with the right amount of nurture, you know, if we're back to the seeds and flowers analogy, with a bit of water, you know, a bit of kind of TLC, that actually they blossom into something really important. But they're tiny. For some of our kids that used to come to one of the provisions I supported, we used to do this thing called Build a Breakfast. And it was our breakfast club that I managed to sort of put together and scrounge around for free, because I love a free thing. And there were 2 ways that you could access Breakfast Club. You could come to Build a Breakfast because you wanted to, because you had something to eat and that's how you wanted to start your day. Well, you came to Build a Breakfast because you were told to be there.
Right.
And that was for both young people and staff. Because sometimes, you know, when we think about when connection has a kind of wobbly moment and we need to put it back together, we plan for reintegration meetings. You know, we do all the wraparound work of what that can look like, but sometimes it gets a bit convoluted. So where we started was over something to eat. And there was one rule at Build a Breakfast. You make something to eat for somebody else. And that applied to whether you were there for fun, there because you wanted to, or because I'd politely suggested that you should be there. Because it didn't look any different. You know, I'd make you some toast, you'd make me a bagel. That was that. And for some young people, whether they were there because I told them to or they were there of their own fruition, it was that moment. It was that ability to say, here's the jam. You had jam yesterday. Here it is. I've finished. I've made you toast because I know you like it cut in triangles, not in rectangles. Those teeny tiny moments.
I know you like it dark. I know you like it light.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
For some of our kids, absolutely cremated. It was terrifying. But that opportunity that over a bit of something to eat in a really kind of low stimulus, casual environment, that's where we got to learn about a lot of the experiences that our young people were having. And they were teeny tiny moments, but they shaped so much. And it generally cost me, a tub of butter. I managed to scrounge the bread for free, but it was the butter I had to pay for. And the jam.
Oh, wonderful. That's really lovely. And it's not just the giving and noticing things like that, is it? That's where you get people who would never normally talk with each other or never normally share anything of their own lives, especially for staff. But in that context, it just lends itself, doesn't it? And it doesn't, if you get it right, it doesn't feel like hard work. It is, because it isn't hard work. It's important work, but it's not hard work.
Yeah, I think the effort comes from the time and the patience. That sometimes what we're looking for with strategies is that we're looking for them to work, and we're looking for them to work now. But actually kind of taking away that pressure of allowing it to just happen. We're back to curiosity, aren't we? Of allowing something to just be and to wonder what it might represent and what it might be telling us. We both work with a lady called Karen, a really wonderful woman. And she talks about the 3 W's, the wait, watch, and wonder. And the only one we'd maybe negate is the wait if somebody was in harm's way. But we're considering, what is it that this means? What does this show us? What can I, kind of tag onto here and start to build connection and nurture? And is this something that flourishes into safe attachment? Is this something that flourishes into friendship and trust in those wobbly moments? So that's why connection is so important. And it's something we've got to shout loudly about, because I think if we do drift onto the news apps, if we do get drawn into certain conversations, that this idea around connection and relationships and relational approaches can be kind of palmed off as a kind of soft approach to supporting young people. But we've got to keep kind of taking people and holding their hands on the journey to show them why it's so important, why it's something we've got to start, even if, like you said, if all we can do is plant seeds that hopefully some other educator, some other practitioner years down the line will get to see those seeds turn into really wonderful flowers. I don't think I've ever made so many floral kind of... I feel like Alan Titchmarsh. I feel like... I don't think I've ever made this many kind of floral-related anecdotes in my life.
But no, it's lovely, though. It is lovely, and you're absolutely right. And I think that's a really nice way for us to circle the square and come back to what it is that we're here for, and that idea of connection. And it's a cliche. They won't remember necessarily what you've said. They will remember how they make you've made them feel, and that's the legacy of connection, isn't it? Because you create people who then go on to be able to connect with others and develop the connect and build that and be that person for somebody else down the line.
Yeah. And if you were going to look to control anything, this idea that sometimes control makes us feel safe. I think the thing I'd like to have some control and influence over is how I make people feel. Because after that, the kids I've kind of crossed paths with, that there's not much more I can do about those interactions now. But the thing that I can shape in the moment and look back on is how I made them feel.
That's a great way for us to end, actually. I think, Jack, that's it. Yeah, controlling how they feel. Lovely. Thank you. I think we're done.
Did we just record our first podcast episode?
We did. So thank you for joining us in our first curious conversation. Keep asking questions, keep listening, and keep creating classrooms and communities that truly include. Until next time, bye-bye.